For those of you that don't know my background, I am a former Abrams tanker, served in Iraq, served in Afghanistan as a contractor. I have hundreds of combat missions, well, hundreds of missions in general, kind of a varied thing that we were doing over there outside the wire. So I am intimately familiar with asymmetric warfare. And this is a discussion on why going into Iran with a ground combat force is a terrible idea. Now, let me preface this with saying I understand the background. I understand the lore here. I am not numb to it, but I also remember that Iran and the United States used to be friends. There's been much that has transpired since these two countries were friends, and there's a lot of background here. Now, also understand that I got blown up by an Iranian-made EFP. I have been rocketed by a 107 millimeter Iranian rocket. Many of them. Many of them. And many of you, if you served in GWOT, in Global War on Terrorism, have been blown up by Iranian-made weapons. The IRGC and the Quds Force have been busy attacking U.S. and coalition forces for decades. Iran has been basically asymmetric warfare corporate for the longest time. And I'm not numb to that. I also remember the lessons that we learned during the global war on terrorism, where you are fighting ghosts. You're not fighting a uniformed army. You're fighting an army of usually men who would take their rifles, shoot at you, drop the rifles, and go stand by their kids. Imagine the optics in an era where everybody has a smartphone, where sniper, hits a couple soldiers, drops his rifle, goes and stands by a crowd. Friends of that soldier return fire. Imagine the optics. That's just one very small example. We need to remember that Iran recently said, "Come closer." What do they mean by that? That means that when we land our forces, we're not going to be probably facing a massive D-Day, Normandy invasion. They will probably let our forces get closer. They'll probably let them get in the cities, but they'll be prepared. They'll have RPGs ready. They will have machine gun nests ready. They will have snipers ready. They will have IEDs ready. They will have drones ready. What is our current counter from a mechanized maneuver warfare standpoint to FPV drones? Is that a good plan? What is our current plans to defend against multi-aspect RPG impacts for armored vehicles? Sure, we've got trophy. Do we have enough? I don't know. Maybe. That's really none of my business, but it's something to think about. I'm not telling you what to think. It's just things to think about. They would absolutely hide behind civilians. Imagine us, them shooting out of a house, us turning around and shooting into that house, and then all of a sudden that video's everywhere, all over Twitter, all over Instagram, Facebook, MySpace, whatever it is. Imagine the tanks that are just rolling into the cities, just getting blasted by IED after IED. It's an unknown threat. You're sending tanks in there with no tanks to fight. They're not going to send their freaking tanks out. They're going to do the same thing they did in Iraq. We're going to be fighting ghosts. So sending dismounted troops in there is, arguably worse because they're not protected by armor. It's not a guaranteed kill if you get hit by something in a tank. If you get hit by something as a dismount, you're at the very least going to need to go back to the medical center to get some stuff sewn back on or put back in or who knows what. There's a lot of juicy bits on you as a dismount. So sending dismounted troops is a terrible idea as well. Now I understand small teams, special operations forces, targeting, and BDA, things like that. Yeah, I understand that. Thus far, we've been doing a pretty good job as a precision strike targeting thing that we've been doing, dropping JDAMs, dropping laser-guided bombs, using F-15s, B-52s, B-1s, F-16s, F-35s, and all that. The second that we actually set foot on there with a mass formation, you can expect mass casualties, massive amounts of trauma, massive collateral damage. It's not a winning solution because the Iranian army is not going to show up in their uniforms with their freaking BTRs, BMPs, and T-72s, and Zulfikars or whatnot. They're gonna, you're gonna find abandoned bases. Where are all the soldiers? They're in the cities waiting for you. They're behind a berm waiting for you. Now, you could potentially mitigate some of that by having massive overwatch, a massive surveillance state, but that becomes incredibly expensive. And now we have drones. Your logistical hubs are going to get hit by drones. Your supply lines are going to be hit by drones. Anything near the shore that comes close enough is going to get hit by drones. So this is a massive problem. Thus far, the U.S. Navy has been operating relatively outside of that smaller FPV drone range. That's why you're not seeing these massive drone strikes on impacting some of the ships. The ships have they've been hard enough to detect that they're doing a good job at kind of mitigating some of those threats. Not to say that they aren't under constant attack. But once you put them closer, then the volume of attack, the likelihood of something making it through that defensive net becomes much larger. And when we're thinking about committing an armor formation to a ground fight that's already wildly unpopular, it does not bode well. The justification for this, and I've said this numerous times on various different things, is Saddam Hussein and the weapons of mass destruction did not sell well initially during the Iraq War or through the entire Iraq War. And this is arguably worse. I mean, we were supposed to have knocked out the Iranian nuclear capability. And now, we can't really justify going in there. What would be the point? So I realize there has been no announcement of ground troops going into Iran presently, and this is just something to think about as a reason why you don't want to send troops in there. Because it's going to become another geopolitical quagmire. It could very easily become another GWOT with that endless scope creep, the no clearly defined end state, and that massive asymmetric conflict that just drags on and has very limited progress. Because when you're on their home turf, civil affairs is going to have an uphill battle. Are there some people that would celebrate the United States? It's hard to say, honestly. It really is difficult to say. The question is, are there enough, or are there potentially enough people that would be, supportive of a Bradley driving down their local streets, or Abrams tanks driving down their local streets with an 18-year-old kid who doesn't have a driver's license accidentally rolling over their uncle's car? So these, like I said, it's not things to think, it's things to think about. I appreciate you listen to me rant. Hopefully you guys have some good comments and thoughts. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Catch you guys in the next one.